Luisa, thanks so much for joining me on your podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're a project leader slash manager at BCG. Let's learn a little bit more about yourself first before we talk about the topic of today. What did your journey over the past couple of years look like?
Sure. So I've always been more or less in between business and technology. And I come from a background, I studied computer science, then kind of explored that interconnectedness with business and kind of demand in that. Went on to a tech startup, funnily enough, basically doing conversational marketing, basically chatbots and AI-based business case or use case enablement. Actually, when I think about that, that has been the early shoes of Gen AI use cases or AI in a customer-centric way. And then actually went ahead to join BCG, specifically BCG Platinian, so our tech division, a couple of years ago in Munich, and around 2 years ago joined the New York office, and ever since been kind of evolved around automotive, around the tech space, around that, especially with use cases in supply chain, manufacturing tech, and also a little bit of consumer experience there as well.
That's fascinating. Before we dive deeper into Gen AI a little bit further down the line, what from your previous experience are some of the big technology slash digitization trends you see amongst some of these automotive slash industrial incumbents?
That's a good point. So overall, there is a lot of what I call buzzword throwing around. So I think a lot of big companies claim and jump on trends. We have seen a lot in LLM as well as like Gen AI. Everybody's jumping on Gen AI. But I think there is a bigger sense of trying to actually understand what it is and trying to make it use case friendly and business applicable. And that's something I see over the time big corporations really struggle with. For example, ChatGPT is out for over a year now, but we see so little adoption of actually the use cases. So very curious to see how we over time will adapt a little bit better, especially in those more slowly moving industries, like for example, automotive.
Mm. If you just on a sort of very high level, what I see a lot is sort of loads of use cases that are being identified where senior leaders believe a Gen AI solution might be the way to go. And we see quite a lot of proof of concepts, but very little scale. I was just wondering whether, first of all, you see that as well. And then secondly, why do you think that's the case?
You see me smiling. I think that is a common pitfall. We do a lot of that work. We do a lot of that exploration of use cases. We prioritize them and we run POCs. And then we hand off to our clients. And at that point, it goes downwards and I think that's two drivers that actually do drive the lack of real-time implementation or implementation of those use cases. One is time. I see people not allocating time or seeing too much of a long-term implementation issue. So they go all or nothing on use cases. So they want to scale from one particular POC to the entire corporation. And second point is actually lack of impact driving or value driving use cases. So I think while it does make sense, it's all fancy to set up GenAI use cases and POCs, if there is no value generated out of it and we can't scale that value to an organization, that will slowly shift off a priority list of executives and therefore will also die with a project initiative and will just be closed out.
Mm. What we've seen a lot over the past couple of years from consultants are these maturity assessment, capability assessments, cloud readiness, all of these kind of things. Do you think there are certain factors that would influence an organization's Gen AI maturity in terms of things they need to put in place to be able to sort of set up a holistic, hopefully promising approach to Gen AI?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think, and I call myself guilty there as well. We jump in and we come with all that flashy use cases that we promise to build on top of the existing tech stack, but also data structure. And I think before companies are actually ready, and we do that a lot of like readiness assessments, we actually need to understand whether the current tech stack needs to be modernized and is actually able to facilitate that type of like AI use cases. Same with data. I think there is so much inconsistency in data structures and way how data governance are set on that, quite frankly, some GenAI use cases, even if they are or would be bringing a lot of value, are technically just not possible to implement across an organization with the current data structure they've set up.
What are some of the use cases that come to mind that you would suggest organizations to focus on right now, and then which ones potentially further down the line?
I think it really comes on to what a particular focus area is. I think overall doing an assessment across where do we compare low against competition, exactly like, for example, automotive, we have a lot of need for production automation or design manufacturing automation and improving that processes. But also a big piece is customer experience. I think those two are or can be used as low-hanging fruits here. So I think in production ways of like just scraping all the data that we have and being able to facilitate things like maintenance structures or schedules of like understanding when production lines need to be maintained or so. Secondly, on the customer experience side, we see a lot of need for really like in-person like sales cycle. So buying a car will always be an emotional factor as well for a human, and therefore kind of trying to enable that, and with that cutting costs, driving efficiency. I think one simple use case, and just getting very specific here, would be actually taking all the customer acquisition data and setting up a GenAI-based CRM to actually facilitate that sales process.
One of the big questions that's always really important when thinking about these large-scale technology programs is, what shall we do internally and what shall we do externally? So typical sort of make or buy decision. You already mentioned OpenAI as one of the really popular players in this space. What are your thoughts on capabilities some of these large incumbents should aim to internalize as a potential differentiator down the line, and where should they seek to partner externally?
That's a good one. I think it really comes down to a talent question and an appetite to grow capabilities in-house versus just buying capabilities. I mentioned that at the beginning. I think it is always, even if bought outside and you bring in a couple of like experience in terms of, in this case, GenAI use cases that we've seen across the industries, and to just buy in expertise, it does make sense to build at least like a partnering side internally to build that knowledge and being able to maintain that use cases. We talked about like they drop up at a certain point easily after external ones leave. And then it also helps to kind of drive innovation internally. So I think if it comes to a structure, we more or less see a lot of 50-50. So setting up an like innovation squad out of 50% external, 50% internal, or even a little bit less on the internal side. But I personally am a big fan of having heroes on the internal side that are very excited about the topic, that do want to build their career on top of it, and that do have that like kind of fresh appetite to explore and get enabled by the company to do so.
It's super interesting. In terms of specific capabilities, what do you think, just from a sort of workforce and talent standpoint, what are some of the specific capabilities that you believe will be of demand, whether within original equipment manufacturers or with technology partners?
That's a good question. I think that's $1 million question here. I think we seek for talent with a little bit of technical background as well as a business understanding. And I'm thinking more very specifically, we talked about use cases, a functional expertise in production, as well as some technical understanding. I think that's a great pair. But then, and I think that's where it gets a little bit harder to pinpoint, we're talking about a lot of transferable skills of being able to adapt to new problems, because quite frankly, the space of Gen AI, for example, is moving so fast. And I think everybody really like comes up with long-term expertise or long-standing expertise at that point is not really correct, because this space is moving so fast. So what you're looking for is more the curiosity in a person, yet with a couple of fundamentals in like business in that function, as well as like a technical understanding of at least what's happening and how to build that up front.
Mm. I know what you mean. I've been speaking to surprisingly many 10+ years Gen AI experience experts recently.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine.
So let's talk maybe about specific use cases across some of the business areas. You have done quite a bit of work in industrial operations / supply chain. What are some of the specific areas and use cases that organizations might want to look into over the short to medium term?
So I think let me start off with kind of the bigger issues I see in automotive / supply chain or across OEMs. So we see increasing volatility. We see kind of market dynamics and geopolitical tensions, and we also see a growing like product complexity with all the customizations and also kind of sourcing strategies that you have across the globe at that point. And over that, we also add a lot of like data complexity to it. We're able to capture nearly everything, but companies are really overloaded with how to deal with that type of data loads. So I think talking about supply chain, where one specific case I really do like is I'm trying to set up a little bit of an end-to-end visibility or end-to-end supply chain value chain with AI capabilities, and actually making sure you do capture data points across your value chain. Very simple, getting from your rims producer his inventory numbers and being able to, in case of a shortage, being able to distribute across distribution centers flexibly, but it being able to put that type of data in a very insightful way and bringing that up to, for example, a supply chain professional, and giving that person the opportunity to then steer and take actions based on kind of that type of information. I think that's a use case that we've seen that has, or I personally have implemented. You can build on top of that, and we can talk about that as well. There's quite some interesting Gen AI use cases in that as well.
It's fascinating. Another area you've looked into is around digital twins. First of all, for people not so close to the topic, what are digital twins? And then we can maybe talk a little bit more about why they're relevant here.
Good point. So I think there's 1 million definitions of a digital twin. Let me put it in simple words. For me, a digital twin is a representation of an asset or a construction or even a process that appears in the physical world. So basically what you're trying to do is simulate something that you would usually have in real life, and let me put use the example of a plant, a production plant here. Before you actually build that plant and then figure out that you do have quite some issues and kind of measured things wrongly, production lanes do not flow the way you want them, you are able to actually set up a digital twin, which is basically a simulation software that helps you reconstruct or forecast how processes could go. And that giving that use case will help you be more efficient, be more resourceful, and also just increase productivity in terms of getting production lanes set up in the correct way.
And what role does GenAI play in this context? How would it potentially elevate the digital twin in these different areas or more you refer to?
I think when we talk about this and just if you think about building a plant, there is so much information out there, and we were able to get computer systems to simulate and to build up constructs and models to simulate processes. Yet we as humans do have limitations on what we can comprise and understand. I think GenAI has huge capability. It gives us the chance as kind of an end user, as somebody that plans the plant, to actually ask natural language questions and being able to comprise and get your pieces of information that you're seeking for in a kind of natural way. In that case, you don't have to study or be an expert in that computer simulation software in order to get your insights.
That's fascinating. One of the sort of big areas moving a little bit away from the industrial operations space, looking at the value chain a little further down, is the sort of customer space. And this seems to be, at the moment, sort of the most dynamic space from a startup and interest standpoint around how can we optimize our end customer experience and the integration into our customers' wider ecosystem. To kick things off, from your experience, what are some of the big trends in the automotive customer experience space that you currently see?
So one big one, I'm happy to dive deeper into that one, is hyper-personalisation, especially in that acquisition space. I think that it has huge potential being able to actually just tailor your client acquisition, customer acquisition path to your real customers. I think there's huge value that can be unlocked. Another big trend that I'm seeing is in-car enhancements and basically in-car assistance that actually help the driver in that case navigate his car or her car a little bit better.
In terms of making the link to GenAI, you already referred to some of the potentially NLP interfaces using some of the already existing solutions. What are some of the sort of use cases or I guess new potential ideas in this space to transform the customer journey, either sort of in the wider ecosystem in terms of awareness and purchasing, or then in the vehicle? Are there any particular ones that you would recommend organizations to look into?
Absolutely. So I think especially in if we stay on the hyper-personalization path and just looking at choosing a car, I would assume your idea of a perfect car is pretty different to mine, and that will differ across a lot of people. So I think with GenAI, we're looking at like marketing and sales opportunities to tailor, going down to even visuals of ads that just are bespoken to me and you in a certain way. And with that, I think we're just giving like exponential power to a marketing team or sales team to be able to capture or to build new content based on kind of my profile, and across that gather information from me and you at that point. So understanding kind of what am I looking for in a car, and being able to then filter that back into my car acquisition process. So thinking of you capturing a couple of data of me looking at continuously red convertibles, you'll be able to, with GenAI or GenAI applications, tailor and generate ads for me with red convertibles. And throughout that information and my reaction to it will filter back to kind of a sales associate that when I come into a store, actually will make sure that that red convertible is actually in place and ready for me to look at. I think there is such a big impact that you can have there with little things. We're just talking about implementing or introducing very simple applications to sales and sales and sales and marketing team. It's not rocket science at that point, and it's also not magic. I think it's more about sending and tailoring, but also capturing that data back that I see is huge potential.
You mentioned a few times that data is hugely important, and with data, amongst others, there are, of course, risks associated with it, some legal risks and brand risks. Of course, we've got our GDPR, we've got now in Europe, the AI Act. What are some of these sort of wider risks when we think about implementing GenAI use cases in the customer space and beyond that organizations need to be aware of?
I think that's a good point. And if we go back and consider over risk of, for example, creating content for you and me, I think we're tapping into risk of just tapping down into biases. So does my profile in that case always mean I'm looking for a red convertible? And does that just apply to a certain demographic? And how do we ensure that we still somehow have a neutral sense of our customer base? On the other hand, I think just at that point, capturing data in a compliant and privacy protecting way is a huge obstacle and challenge, especially for, like I mentioned at the beginning, slowly moving or slowly transforming organizations, such as a couple in the automotive space. I think there is, and shockingly enough, I see that a lot of low security and kind of low protected data sources across that area. And if we start to capture especially those like person-specific data points, we want to make sure that our data structure is really set up for that, and we do not have any issues down the line, because as you mentioned, those have huge consequences.
Final question from my side, and zooming out a little bit more, imagine you're talking to, probably you are talking to them anyway, to some of the leaders in charge of data and AI organizations amongst some of these incumbents. What are some of the maybe top 3 recommendations that you would make to essentially unlock the value associated with GenAI in their organizations?
So first would be a no surprise, do get your tech stack right and get your tech stack AI use case ready. And if that means decommissioning a couple of your legacy systems and just making sure your tech stack is as lean but as robust as possible. Second would be a little bit around data here as well. So get your data structures clean and robust. With robust, I also mean protection ready, and just get those data points. We mentioned that earlier with the production pieces. Am I able to get my data from my semiconductors and so on? And thirdly, be open. I think there is quite some exploration, and I think as an organization, you do need to really step out of your comfort zone and understand that not every use case will generate the value that you're looking for, but this is more an exploration process. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but if you win, you might win really, really big.
Great. Final note. Thanks so much for joining me today, Luisa. It's been a super insightful and fun conversation.
Thank you so much.